The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Tuesday, June 4th, 2019. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Rachel Louise Snyder, author of No Visible Bruises. What we don't know about domestic violence can kill us. Also on the program today, House Democrats to hold Barr and Wilbur Ross in contempt over the census question. Clyburn walks back his impeachment comments a day later as a Democrat mutiny brews in the House caucus. Former Michigan Governor Rick Snyder has had his digital records along with dozens others seized in the ongoing Flint water criminal probe. Meanwhile, a Trump-appointed federal judge quashes the Democratic suit to stop the border wall money reallocation. And a Trump transition figure tied to the Seychelles meeting involving Eric Prince and an emissary from Russia charged with child porno.
Seychelles.
Again.
Those are old charges on that guy. He got charged again?
He got charged in the 80s.
Yeah, in the 80s.
And they found some new stuff.
Oh, Jesus.
Weird how that works out that way.
Diplomacy.
Meanwhile, the Federal Trade Commission adds Facebook to its growing antitrust probe. As House lawmakers join the fray, Democrats are going to hold hearings. Speaking of the House, it finally passed a $19 billion disaster aid after Republicans stopped it, 3 or 4 times last week? Dallas Police Department reports a second killing of a black transgender woman in 2 weeks. Meanwhile, ICE document shows that the detainee deaths were preventable. And the IAEA report Iran still in compliance with the 2015 nuclear deal. All this and more on today's program, ladies and gentlemen. We've got a lot to get through to today. This ICE document, great reporting work by Ken Klippenstein over at TYT. Good for them. Good for them. They've been doing a lot of reporting work. Doesn't get as much attention, obviously, as their main show, but they've been doing some very good work over there as of late. So folks should check that out. Ken and Jonathan Larson over there as well. Should tell you straight up, want to wish, look, there's been a problem. And I've noticed this over the past several years. And I think it's changing. I feel like we're bringing it back. But for a long time, this time of year, people would just be like, hey, happy end your daily fast, the fast that you're doing during the day. No one would say anything about it. It would just be like, hey, how you doing? Oh, good to see you. Happy spring or something like that. Well, it's coming back. Eid Mubarak, ladies and gentlemen. More people are saying it now. It's the end of Ramadan. This was a war on Christmas Joke. Eid Mubarak.
I thought Eid Mubarak was someone I'm going to learn about in illicit history on TMBS.
Right.
No.
Oh. Eid Mubarak was actually an anti-colonial revolutionary in the Seychelles.
Yeah, no. Eid Mubarak. It's the end of the Ramadan fast. Where they fast for like 30 days. During the day.
Well, during the day. It's
During the day.
Sun up to sundown.
Sun up to sundown.
And then there's a lot of incredibly. I was able to many years ago. I got to have some friends had me over for a break the fast meal. Delicious.
Yeah, I don't know that it's that consistent. Sometimes, like I've talked to people, they're like, "Well, you have cookies in the morning, and then you can do whatever you want. Just hang out. You go out. There's no tradition of this guy. I don't know. Different people probably celebrate different ways. So Eid Mubarak. Also, it is the 30th anniversary of Tiananmen Square. I can't believe it has been that long. It's sort of terrifying to me in some respects. 30 years ago, about, I don't know, 1 million people, was it? Or that showed up in the, was it 1 million people?
I believe it was 1 million
Yeah.
people. I mean, if you think of population proportion-wise.
Right.
Yeah.
It's hard to sort of like figure out these numbers because it's not like the Chinese government was out there advertising. But hundreds of thousands, if not 1 million people, gathered, protested all around the country, but particularly in Tiananmen Square. They were pro-democracy protesters. And
pro-labor as well. It's one of the lesser-known parts of that history.
On June 3rd, the night of June 3rd, tanks moved into the square, and there was a famous, people I'm sure have seen the video, of a man who basically ran out in front of the tanks and stopped the tanks. He only stopped the tanks probably for, I don't know, about 3 minutes. Eventually, some other people came by, and it was never clear to me whether they were his friends or they were some type of like plainclothes agents of the state who ushered him away, and the tanks rolled on. It is unclear how many people were killed when the tanks rolled into Tiananmen Square because, of course, the Chinese government was not going to release that information either. Mike Pompeo made some remarks that were saying to the effect of China has a problem with human rights. Whenever it serves their interests, they will abuse human rights. I mean, the idea that anyone from the Trump administration, which is, hosted Duterte and Bolsonaro and others, Putin, MBS, would have a problem with human rights. Netanyahu is sort of laughable. But nevertheless, they went through the motions, and then the Chinese rebuked Pompeo, et cetera, et cetera. But more importantly, let's listen back. Now, this is, I don't know if we have any contemporaneous comments from Donald Trump on Tiananmen Square. Maybe they'll show up. But what we do have is an interview with Donald Trump from, what magazine was this from?
Playboy magazine.
Playboy magazine.
1990. In
1990. And for those people who think that Donald Trump has, in his old age, become more authoritarian, this is 30 years ago when Donald Trump was probably about, 40-ish? 40-something? And back then, in 1990, what were your impressions of the Soviet Union? Their system is a disaster. I was very unimpressed. And then in talking about Tiananmen Square when it comes to China, because he said the problem with Gorbachev, not a firm enough hand. He says, you mean firm hand as in China? And Trump had this to say. When the students poured into Tiananmen Square, the Chinese government almost blew it. Then they were vicious. They were horrible. But they put it down with strength. That shows you the power of strength. Our country is right now perceived as weak, as being spit on by the rest of the world. This was 30 years ago. This seems to be a theme of his for a long time. But both the authoritarian sort of like longing and the notion that somehow our country's being spit on.
Well, he says at another part in the interview when he talks about how weak Gorbachev is, but he also says, generally a lot of these of their representatives are tougher and smarter than ours.
Yeah.
He said that 30 years ago. I want to
Really
just
tough.
say, just 30 seconds, there was a slightly Gorbachev-like figure in China named, I'm just going to, forgive me, I'm absolutely going to mispronounce this, but his name was Zhao Ziyang, and he was the party premier, and he discouraged the protesters, but he had an open line of dialogue with them and was resisting a call to ruthlessly crack down on them, and eventually, he got sidelined and overruled and went from being at the top of the pyramid to totally politically marginalized the last years of his life.
That's what we get for being weak.
Because he was weak. Right.
So it's nice to know that Donald Trump has been consistent throughout his career. That's always encouraging. But there it is, 30 years, Tiananmen Square. I wonder if actually Trump will mention Tiananmen Square, and I wonder, frankly, if he'll mention the end of Ramadan.
I'm going to go, the first one all depends on how the latest phone conversation with she went, and the second one, no.
A lot of chocolate cake. Yeah.
Someone just in the Discord of TMBS, I have to say, I don't know if we would put this up, but somebody helpfully found us the cover photo of that issue of Playboy, which will add to the vulgarity and hilariousness of this if you want to see.
Very nice.
Jesus, I don't think I need to see that. Not this
I wanna
early in
see
the
it.
morning.
Sorry, this is really bad, but it's...
Also, okay, I can feel the contrarian takes coming, but it is somewhat refreshing, at least, to see a representative of U.S. empire who's not pretending that he cares about human rights.
Yes, that has always been. He said something to that effect too, and I think in terms of oil, I can't remember what it was, but I do remember tweeting out one time like, "This is the most honest thing that any." Yes.
Yeah, this is why all the neocons hate him.
Indeed, he's not hiding the ball. Oof. Jesus.
It's funny,
That's still refreshing.
it says the Donald
to
Trump
hear his
interview.
endorsement of the Tiananmen crackdown.
It says Donald Trump interview, and the next story is rock and racism. Has the dark side taken over pop music? Oh yeah, I'll be reading that. Has the dark side? I'm concerned about the dark side. And
Thanks
rock
for
music.
putting that on top. I like that. Appreciate that. Hey, folks, one of today's sponsors is Skillshare. And anyone who goes to skl.sh/majorityReport4, or just go to the podcast description or the YouTube description and click the clickable link, right, Jamie, is going to get 2 whole months of totally free access to Skillshare's entire library of super quality online courses and tutorials. Skillshare is a vibrant online learning community that offers courses on everything from design to video editing, photography, business, technology, meditation, and everything in between. There are Skillshare courses for everyone. You're going to have no problem finding courses that are going to be useful for you, both in your business and in your personal life. And whether you sharpen your skills with something you already love doing, or you want to learn how to do something totally new, Skillshare has you covered. They have courses for entrepreneurs, courses on computer coding, web development, personal nutrition, learning new languages, Photoshop, you name it. I've started to get a little bit addicted to this. And they also now have, I don't know if this is all new, because I didn't notice these before, but they're workshops that you can actually you don't actually have to physically attend, but that take place over a couple of days to learn stuff. But I'm getting a little bit addicted to this. I don't know what lucid dreaming is, but I'm going to check that out.
It's when you have some sort of consciousness that you are dreaming.
You have an
I can do
awareness
that.
of the dream
That
state
to me
itself.
happens all the time,
Yeah, me
but I'm
too.
going to just check that out to see if that
it's not
works.
just sleeping poorly. It means an awareness of the dream state. It's a different thing.
You can fly around and stuff.
There's also a course, a productivity masterclass, create a custom system that works. I need that desperately. Desperately. I need to get into that. And then chess openings dominate with the Schleiman Gambit. That's what I'm going to be doing, because I'm going to teach Saul how to play chess, and I want to make sure I'm able to beat him for a long time. It's very important.
That's how they
You'll
learn.
teach him the game, but not the gambit.
Exactly. Got to keep one in my back pocket. You can get 2 entire months of free access to every single course offered by Skillshare by going to skl.sh/Majority Report 4. Just think of everything you'll have at your fingertips for 2 whole months. That's skl.sh/Majority Report numeral 4. Of course, put a link under this on YouTube and in the podcast description. Also, you got to check this out. Whether you're trying to get a sweet deal on something or find the best happy hour in town, what do you do? What do you do, Michael?
When I'm looking for a sweet deal on something or trying to find the best happy hour in town, I have a couple of trusted friends that I ask.
Okay.
Or I go on Google. Sorry, is that the one you were looking for?
Well, you look at the
reviews. I look it up online.
First.
I look
right.
of course.
But if you have trusted friends, great.
That's a form of review.
Do you have any trusted friends who know about software for 700 different types of businesses?
Absolutely not.
Well, you do now.
Thank you.
Because you can read thousands of real software reviews and find the right software for your business, Michael, at your friend, capterra.com/majority.
I'm personalizing it. I have a friend. This is how we develop our relationship with AI. I love it.
Capterra is the leading free online resource to help you find the best software solution for your business. Hi, Michael. It's Capterra. You seem like you're really calm. Did you just go away on a talkless retreat?
I wasn't talking for a whole week, Capterra. Are there any new reviews on business software to help me crush the competition?
Over 850,000 reviews of products from real software users, more than 700 specific categories of software. 700 specific categories of software.
That is astonishing.
From project management to email marketing, has everything you need to make an informed decision fast. Join the millions of people who use Capterra each month to find the right tools for their business. Folks, this is an aggregation site. You go there and it is, if you have a business, it is worth going, even if you're not looking for a software, because you probably don't realize there is not just a software, but there are multiple versions and types of software that are suited to your extremely specific business. You a dog walker? There's software for that. Home inspections? Software for that. And not just one type of software. There's multiple versions. And you can go there and read reviews. Visit capterra.com/majority for free today to find the tools to make an informed software decision for your business. Capterra.com/majority. Capterra, that's CAPTERRA.com/majority. Capterra, software selection simplified. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk to Rachel Louise Snyder, author of What We Don't Know About Domestic Violence Can Kill Us, No Visible Bruises. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It is a pleasure to welcome to the program author and associate professor at American University, Rachel Louise Snyder, author of No Visible Bruises, What We Don't Know About Domestic Violence Can Kill Us. Welcome to the program, Rachel.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Let's start with just how sort of shockingly recent in many respects the concept, and I know you have an issue with the with referring to it as domestic violence. We'll get to that, but the idea that a spouse could not abuse, or I guess I'm not sure exactly where, from a legal perspective what constitutes this, but that it's a relatively recent phenomena. Not just in human history, but even in the context of this country, that domestic violence was a crime.
Right. Yeah. I was shocked to read that as well. So you're not alone if you're blown away by that fact. But yes, it was not until 1984 that there was a federal law against spousal abuse in this country, which, is certainly my lifetime. I found that shocking as well. In very extreme cases, you would sometimes have charges brought, and there were certain states that had laws much earlier than 1984, but a federal law was not written in this country until 1984.
And so what was I think I know, but I think it's important to articulate what the sort of the theory behind that was, that you can't and we should be clear that when we talk about the domestic abuse, certainly it happens where women batter their husbands, or women batter their wives, or husbands batter their husbands, or but it's generally, when we're talking about this generally, I think just statistically, we're talking about men beating women.
We're generally talking about men beating women, and yes, it includes all those other constellations. It really comes from the idea that a spouse, a wife, was one's property, and historically, it was seen as part of your responsibility to keep your property in line, and so there were not any laws written against spousal abuse except in extreme cases. There were laws that said things like, you weren't supposed to leave marks, or you were not supposed to leave lasting injury, that kind of thing. So extreme examples, but nothing until the 80s.
Wow. That's nuts. But I guess that's part of the problem. And in terms,
that's the benefit of hindsight, right? Though, we have clear-eyed hindsight when we look at that and think, wow, that is crazy. But I also think, and I apologize for interrupting, but I also think, the women's movement began at large in the 70s in this country. And I think it's important to point out that social progress does usually precede policy. And so it's certainly true in this case, where women were advocating to not be beaten by their spouses. And finally, 15 years into their message, the federal government got the memo.
Well, and I think this is also important to note, and it's not just in this instance, but just sort of broadly in issues like this, that because there's a federal law, it's not like the trajectory that allowed for this concept that women are their husband's property ended. Right? Legally it may have, but in terms of the cultural forces and the psychological forces that allowed that to exist, that dynamic to exist legally, that trajectory still moves forward, and I think we can see that, at least in the context of I was just blown away by how many women a day in this country die from domestic violence, and that number is going in the wrong direction. Will you tell us more?
Yeah, sure. It's a really important question. I've been on the phone with you for 6 minutes now, and every minute 20 people are beaten in this country. So that's, I'm no mathematician, but that's 120 people just since we've been talking. And that's not counting homicides, which is the second part of your question. There's a researcher at Northeastern University who started tracking, he's been tracking domestic violence homicides for decades, but in 2017 noticed an uptick. So for decades, we've said in this country, 3 women a day are killed by their abusive partners. Since 2017, that number is now 4, which is a 33% increase. I mean, you have things like, you talk about the private problem or the idea of it happening behind closed doors. And you can even see just a week or two ago, the congressman from Mississippi, McLeod, clocked his wife while he was drunk.
Right.
And they issued a statement that didn't at all address his violence, but instead talked about the media getting some of the facts wrong or the context wrong and asking for privacy in this moment. And that underscores the problem. Like there's nothing in their press release that acknowledges that he did a violent act. I mean, imagine a stranger coming up and clocking his wife.
Right.
We would never treat that the same way. So it's galling when you think about what people who claim to love us are able to get away with that a stranger would never get away with,
I want to get back into that concept of how the love, I guess, in this instance, somehow is a mitigating factor or whatnot. But this idea that, or not idea, I mean, this potential reality that the number of deaths has gone up. And I wonder if there's also a commensurate number of domestic violent events, like beatings. In other words, like, how is that possible? Right? Like, I mean, theoretically, we should be moving, we're getting more sophisticated. I mean, you go, one of the aspects of the book is to examine programs that have been started, one particular in Massachusetts, that are, and we'll get to that about how to address this. But broadly speaking, I mean, theoretically, right, we should be getting better at this. There should be the forces that create these scenarios where women are trapped in these situations, both from like a psychological perspective, but also from sort of material issues. Mm-hmm. These theoretically should be addressed. How is it possible that this is maybe getting worse?
Yeah, I know. It's mind-boggling when you think about it in that way. But another way to think about it, and maybe I'm overly optimistic, but another way to think about it is that at every moment where we've had great social upheaval in this country, it has been met with severe retaliation. I mean, you think about the suffrage movement, the union movement, the civil rights movement. I mean, there was significant retaliation. And so my hope, and I guess it is really a hope at this point, is that we're going to look back on this period and it's going to be a moment of great upheaval that led to great progress. Because the fact is, while the numbers are not with us, the numbers are alarming. It's also true that there are people who are doing really incredible work around this issue. And so I do think we're getting better and better. At the same time, maybe paradoxically, that we seem to be kind of taking a step back. But I think part of this is that the Me Too movement, which began in 2017, perhaps not coincidentally coinciding with the rise of domestic violence homicides, I don't know, but I think that has given people a real voice, people who have never spoken before.
I don't want you to speculate. I don't want to push you into speculation too much, because we have a whole book full of very well reported facts here and dynamics. But do you think that it's a backlash to Me Too when you say that? When you say it's, you don't, I mean, and I understand this is speculation, but I wonder, we have a rise in hate crime during this era. We have, the demonstrable religious hate crimes, racial hate crimes. There's also, it seems to me, that misogyny played at least some significant role in, both in terms of like why people may have voted against Hillary Clinton. I'm not saying it was determinate, but I think it's, we would have to be ridiculous to think that misogyny didn't play a role, particularly when you also had a candidate who was, I think by all accounts, demonstrably misogynist.
Yeah.
Does this like sort of like feeling that exists in the ether, as it were, of our society implicate this stuff or no?
I mean, yes, you're right that it's speculation, but also we don't exist in the world as a series of isolated, issues or as people who are disconnected from these things. So yeah, I think they are all connected, but I also think that one of the things that I think that the 2017 elections have given a voice to fringe elements too. And, I like to think of, for example, I live in Washington, D.C., like politically really progressive in terms of the people who live here, the actual citizens, and my local bookstore, Politics and Prose, had an incident a couple of weeks ago that you probably heard about. It made national news where the author of the book, White Fragility, was doing a reading, and 10 or so members of the alt-right came in and disrupted the reading and, had a bullhorn and it made national news. And those 10 people were identified, at least half of them were identified within hours. And everybody was outraged. It was terrible, for sure. It was terrible. But at the same time, I looked at that and I thought, wait a minute, these people are from all over the Eastern Seaboard and Pennsylvania and, Georgia, Pennsylvania, South Carolina. They had to go to all these different states just to pull a measly 10 people together in a city of 750,000. Like, yeah, their bullhorn is loud, but we got the numbers, I really believe that.
Fair enough. And so, all right, so let's move on to a little bit more about this. I mean, I think, maybe I'm a little bit cynical, but, I don't know if 5 years ago you could have had those 10 people congregate, frankly. And I imagine for every 10 person, every one person who's willing to go with a bullhorn and travel X number of miles to go protest a book reading about white fragility, there's, I don't know what the algorithm is and how many are at home. If it was a little bit closer, they would have gone. But with that said, let's talk about some of the myths that exist about domestic violence, or maybe we should just start with, why is the term domestic violence problematic?
Well, I think anytime you add the word domestic onto something, it softens it, right? I mean, think about international terrorism versus domestic terrorism. It sounds somehow softer. There's a juxtaposition of those two words in relationship to one another. So I think that's part of the problem. But it's also just an abstraction. It was meant to replace wife beating or battered woman syndrome, which is terrible. But at least in terms of imagery, those provided something that you felt in your gut. And I feel like domestic violence doesn't do that. It also doesn't get at the particular psychology of domestic violence. And part of that has to do with the worst elements of it being psychological, not physical. So there are people in the book, for example, who, one woman, her husband used to break CDs and threaten to slit her throat with them. There were no visible bruises, to quote my own title, no visible bruises in that scenario. And yet she lived under this threat of such extreme violence. Another one used to throw a blanket over her head and duct tape her around the neck. No bruises there either. So what do you call that? And I call that terrorism. I call that a form of intimate terrorism or intimate partner terrorism.
And you open the book with a story of a couple that ultimately led to death. Where Rocky and Michelle, where this guy would keep a rattlesnake. Tell us about that story, just to give us a sense of why, how that also manifests this idea.
Yeah. So Rocky and Michelle were a couple in Billings, Montana. They met when she was very young. She was 14. He was 24, which is not uncommon. and she was pregnant by 15. She had 2 kids by the time she was 17. Still graduated high school on time, but he managed to just begin to slowly isolate her. And it's this corrosion that is this kind of corrosion of self and agency that is so pervasive in these relationships. And he would say things to her like, "Oh, I know your family doesn't like me. I don't want to go over there." And she would, out of loyalty, then, stay with him or be with his family on holidays or whatever. And he wouldn't let her work outside the home. He wouldn't let her wear makeup, wouldn't let her have people over, friends over. He told her they were a bad influence on the kids. And eventually, it escalated and escalated until in the months before he killed her and killed their 2 kids and then killed himself, he had gone to the outskirts of Billings and got a rattlesnake and brought it home and kept it in a cage and threatened to put it in bed with her or in the shower with her if she got out of line.
So
it's chilling.
And you describe in this, the part of this is about, or a lot of it, and I think we'll get into this in a little bit more in terms of like it's a question of almost in some ways narcissism and control versus violence and anger. Maybe that's a little bit stark, but more broadly, and I want to start more broad and then get narrowed down. Is there a sort of a demographic? In other words, like I know that part of what of this story, or major part of this story, is the inability of women to get away, many instances, from their partner, and that is a function of like, is there anywhere I can go where my kids are going to be safe? Is there anywhere I can go that I'm going to be safe? I don't have the resources because, as you say, like, these abusers tend to dominate the women in such a way that they don't have their own resources. Maybe they haven't been able to have a job. Maybe they have some instances that weren't allowed to learn to drive or to have a license. Is there, like, broadly, like a demographic that's involved here, like socio and economic?
There really is not. The people who tend to go to prison for domestic violence tend to be minorities, but that is true across prisons in general. And they tend to be lower on the socioeconomic scale as well, particularly if they're white or whatever. But and I think that's partly because middle and upper class white men are able to get away with it, or they have plea deals that send them to anger management classes, or batterers intervention classes. The only real demographic, and this is not widely researched or not nearly researched enough, but in the case of familicide, so when someone kills their whole family, we call that a familicide. Those tend to be largely white men, middle upper class. And so you saw that with Rocky and Michelle. They were solidly middle class. They were white. You saw it with the guy in Colorado. His name is escaping me now, who killed his wife. She was pregnant, and he also killed their 2 daughters just recently, just last year. Or Scott Peterson, another famous one, Lacey Peterson in California. So these kinds of familicides do have a demographic factor to them, but there isn't necessarily higher instances of domestic violence in one community over another.
Is there? Is it easier? I mean, it seems intuitively that it would be easier for women of means to get out of this situation, but does that cut against maybe sort of the psychological aspects of this? I mean, how much of this is? Yeah. I guess what I'm asking on some level is like, how much of this is structural and sociological, and how much of this is psychological?
Well, I mean, it's a complicated question, and it's partly why when we ask the "why didn't she just leave" question, it's so misunderstood as to what we're actually seeing. So let me try and unpack it using Michelle's story. Michelle was not able to work, but she was able to attend college classes. But because she was so young, when she went to Montana State University to sign up and she applied for financial aid, they said, "Oh, well, you don't qualify because you don't have tax returns. You're too young to be independent." And she said, "I've been living on my own. I've got 2 kids, and she wasn't married to Rocky at the time. And they said, "Well, marry him, and then you'll be his dependent, and then you'll qualify for financial aid." So she's taking classes to try to get a nursing degree to leave this man so that she can raise her kids and be economically stable. And she's forced to marry him by the quote unquote system. Right. That's just one example, one life. But the message is given to victims in other ways, too. When Michelle only called the police on Rocky once, actually it was her mother, not her, but they were only called one time. And they came and they arrested Rocky, and his parents bailed him out immediately. And by the time she found out that he was getting bailed out, he was already out. And so as a means of protection against his escalated retaliation, she went and recanted everything. She said she had made up the stuff about the snake. She had made it all up. And so the prosecutor never pressed charges. That is such a common scenario, because what happens is abusers give victims the message that they are stronger than the system. And then that message is underscored when the system puts the abuser's freedom, prioritizes the abuser's freedom over the victim's rights to live safety free. It's also underscored when we say, "Oh, we've got a solution for you," and that solution is shelter. You've got to leave your house, you've got to leave your community, your kids have to leave whatever, sports teams they're playing, and go live in isolation with other traumatized people. It's really quite a terrible answer when you think about it.
In fact, that's one of the myths, or a couple of the myths that you discuss. The idea that shelters are largely effective, that restraining orders are largely effective. Before we get to sort of what can be effective, why else are those ineffective? I mean, is that just from a statistical standpoint, or is it just because there's no there's no support from there, that it's like they're not being mainstreamed? What is problematic, and why is about the ineffectiveness of those solutions, I guess?
Yeah, that's a good question. I always thought that shelter seemed a very adequate answer. I mean, I was like, "Oh yes, we've got this problem solved. We're sending people to shelter." The problem with shelter is complicated. First of all, there's not always room. In fact, in a place like DC where I live, there is always a much higher demand than there is availability. But the other problem is that you're putting the impetus for change on a victim, which really doesn't happen in any other crime. Like, I liken it to, getting your home burgled and having the police come and say, "My goodness, this is terrible that your home has been burgled. Well, we're going to have to take you out of your home, but we're going to leave the burglar here to live here."
Right.
I mean, it's ridiculous. Traditionally, shelters have not allowed you to bring a family pet. They've not allowed boys over the age of 12. They allow maybe 2 or 3 suitcases. You're housed in one room together with your kids. There are rules to a shelter that may or may not be, rules that you generally live by, curfews and things. You're not allowed to have friends over. You're not allowed to work, because that would give away the location of the shelters. So they're abysmal responses. But the biggest problem with them, I think, is the idea of them as a symbolic reference. In other words, we have what has historically been called a private issue, right, between family members. And then we just take that, and we take the victims and we move them from behind one set of closed doors to another set of closed doors. So maybe it's because I'm a literary person or, creative writing professor, but there's a symbolism to that feels completely wrongheaded to me.
In terms of like maintaining some sense of shame, or
yeah,
okay,
yeah, exactly.
So, there seems to me to be 2 things to address. I mean, one is the support for the victims and a means in which to prevent victimization, and then in the event that you don't prevent victimization, you're trying to essentially get the victim out of that situation or protect them. So is there anything for that first part? Like, I mean, what, aside from sort of culturally saying to women, like, you need to, that you should have self-esteem, or that there are certain parameters, or, I mean, is there any way to prevent, and I want to get obviously to the perpetrator side, because we don't, I guess to a certain extent we do this, right? Like, don't, if a cop sees you on the subway and, your backpack is open, they'll say, zip up your backpack. You don't want to get, there are some, there are some preventative things that you can do, but I mean, is there an equivalent to that? Or is it just simply something that like, should only be done from the supply side of this crime?
I didn't mean to laugh. That was I've never heard it like phrased.
Right.
Like that.
Well, it's probably not appropriate because it implies that there's a demand of this. But I mean, there's a. But I mean, do you see what I'm saying here? This is a unique thing in that respect. I mean, I guess. I mean, because we would say like, okay, lock your door if you don't want to get robbed. But I don't know how you prevent, if there's anything to prevent from the beginning. Like, don't get into an abusive relationship, but there's psychological issues that are involved in that as well.
Yeah, I mean, there is certainly a cycle of abuse, right? I mean, I know you want to get into the perpetrators later, but it's important to point out that most perpetrators have abuse in their own childhoods. So this is simply a cycle. And I think in terms of the long term, part of disrupting the cycle is starting education in middle school, because cases like Michelle are not at all unusual, that they meet someone at 14. It's this heady kind of love. And the word corrosion, I use that really deliberately because that is what it feels like. Any of us, if we stood at the receiving end of a punch, would leave immediately. But domestic violence doesn't happen that way, right? It happens with like, oh, honey, I see the way some men are looking at you, the way when you walk down the street when you're wearing that, and I feel like for your own protection, you shouldn't wear that short skirt, or you shouldn't wear so much makeup, right? It's this slow kind of chipping away at one's own sense of agency. And, I have to say, we have expectations about, I think, that the abuser is, evil and the victim is completely innocent, and that is the scenario. And the first thing I want to say is that in sort of lower levels of domestic violence, you find that women are abusers just about as often as men. There is research that points to that. I'm not talking about the high risk, most dangerous cases. I'm talking about the like slapping the cell phone away from somebody or whatever. But that, also the I've lost my train of thought now in the gendered. No, go ahead. Well,
I was talking about like, what can be done. You said intervention at middle school.
That's right. Yeah, intervention. Yes.
And I would imagine that intervention should happen both for potential perpetrators and potential victims.
Oh yeah. I mean, when you're 12, you're probably in terms of like an adult relationship, you're neither. Right. So you're sort of like an open book. And I feel like, gendered education needs to happen really young. I live in DC. Again, it's a really progressive place. About a month ago, my daughter's public school, she's in elementary school, had like a girls' celebration day. Empowerment Day, it was called. And I was like, that's great. But the thing they did was braid the girls' hair. That was their sense of empowerment. And I thought, okay, first of all, you are acquiescing to what you believe a girl is supposed to look like. Second of all, and this is more important to me, they did not include the boys. So none of the boys even knew it was Girls' Empowerment Day. That's not gender education. I mean, I just am like, what? And this is one of the most progressive cities in the country. So again, like that, something like that is not, causing girls to be victims and boys to be abusers, but it does get at a sort of misguided idea of who needs to be taught what, how, and when.
All right. Well, let's talk about the perpetrator side of this, because one of the myths you also talk about is the idea that abusers never change, and we have this sort of dilemma, I guess, to a certain extent. I mean, or not. One that I would imagine, and you've said that people of color are more subjected to getting sent to prison. And I don't know if there is research on this, but just based upon what we know in policing, broadly speaking, that generally black people are sent to prison with a higher rate for the same offenses than white people are. And so, I mean, how do we address this on the perpetrator side? And is that different from how we would address just violent crime in other contexts? And if so, why should it be that way? I mean, we started off by talking about this congressman who, we got to keep this private. It's a family thing, this beating, essentially.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I can speak to other crime, like in general, in terms of incarceration. I feel like that is Michelle Alexander's place. But I will say that I would separate out the and I'm going to use the phrase domestic violence because that's what we're all talking about and that's what we understand. But I would separate it out from the kind of highest risk, most dangerous perpetrators to ones that get heated in an argument and say things that they later regret, right? I'm not sort of dealing with that. I'm dealing with that former, that most dangerous. And I think that, whether or not somebody who is violent can be made to be nonviolent, I want to believe that they can. I sat in on batterers intervention groups from coast to coast, and I learned the shocking fact that men who are abusers are not identifiable from the general populace, right? They're just average guys who are not rageaholics. They are not people who are out of control. In fact, they are very, very in control. And they are often very charming and manipulative. And that's how they get that's how they get their victims to fall in love with them in the first place, is that they're very charming. I know. After writing this book, I have to say I never believe in love at first sight. I am incredibly skeptical of someone who 2 months in is saying, "I love you, I love you, I love you." It's made me a little bit cynical, but I think that as something that we address as a society, we're really still in the infancy of trying to get violent people to become nonviolent. So we didn't even start batterers intervention programs or offender intervention until the late 80s. So, and social science just does not work that quickly. So the efficacy of these programs is questionable. But I still think that the individual exercises in some of them are astounding and potentially life-altering for people who actually want to make a change. And I met plenty of guys who knew they were violent and didn't want to be violent, but didn't have any other skill set, didn't know how else to be in the world. And for guys like that, I think they can really work. I think they can be meaningful.
So, okay. So let's step back and just also now talk briefly about what the system can do, right? I mean, to the extent that we can work with the perpetrators and perhaps, help the perpetrators. We've talked a little bit about the deficiencies in terms of helping the victims, but you write about, Jacqueline Campbell's 20 risk factors that, and we don't need to go through all of them, although if there's a couple that stand out for you, please tell us. But the idea is to integrate the various services that may come in contact with the victim or the perpetrator and increase the communication so that things can be more effective, right? That's basically what came out of this Boston program,
Right,
Massachusetts
right.
program, I guess.
Right, right. So there's a number of things that we can do. And there are huge, systemic things that we can change. But also there's a number of really small tweaks that we can make, like that every jurisdiction can make. One of them is incorporating what you just mentioned, that Jacqueline Campbell created, the danger assessment. And anybody can go to the website and look at these 20 highest risk indicators at dangerassessment.org. And some of them are things like threats to kill, strangulation, beatings while pregnant. They're all signs of increased dangerousness. Jurisdictions can look at their bail statutes and figure out if they can hold somebody for dangerousness longer. In the case of Rocky and Michelle, one of the things that the state of Montana did, which is just mind-boggling in terms of like how it would seem insufficient on the face of it, was that if someone is arrested for domestic violence now, they cannot see a judge until after lunch. So, Rocky bailed out kind of first thing in the morning. That would no longer be allowed in the state of Montana. It seems so unimportant, but what it does is it gives a domestic violence advocate enough time, just a few hours in the morning, to go over and make a safety plan with the victim, to get her into shelter if they need to get her into shelter, to get locks changed on the house, to get an abuser on GPS monitoring maybe. So there's a lot of little tweaks like that.
Just literally the first thing in the morning type of situation.
Yeah, exactly. I would also say that judges need to be educated on the difference between anger management and batterer's intervention. They are not at all synonymous. The psychology behind them is not the same. So, like Ray Rice at the NFL got sentenced to anger management and then his charges were dropped. I mean, or thrown out, not dropped, but that's just a real misunderstanding of the psychology of domestic violence. So there are all kinds of things. And of course, the other thing, and this is controversial in America, but the other thing is to take guns from abusers. If you are charged with domestic violence and found guilty, you are not supposed to have access to guns under federal law. But very few jurisdictions actually implement that.
You also talk about, I think, research that showed that someone went into a prison and talked to I don't know if it was a dozen or so men who had killed their wives or their partners, and the vast majority of them said that if they didn't have access to a gun, that woman would be alive today.
Yeah. 11 of the 14. That was a book called "Why Do They Kill" by David Adams. And he asked that question that he asked, 14 of them who had killed their spouses with guns, men, and 11 of the 14 said they would not have killed her if they wouldn't have owned a gun, or a gun wouldn't have been readily accessible in that moment.
So if we have all these sort of like disparate things that could be done, and like, is this something that has to happen on a community by community basis, or is there any role to be played for like a broad public policy initiative by the federal government, or just at large? I mean, the only thing I can say is that the one thing that I did notice in the course of the government shutdown was that domestic violence centers, I guess, or advocacy groups or shelters were some of the first victims, as it were, of the government shutdown. But I don't know if there was any like broad policies associated with that other than just sort of funding for programs.
Yeah, well, the simple answer to that question is yes and yes. It needs to happen in individual jurisdictions, but the federal government can do a lot. First of all, by instituting VAWA. The Senate still has not reauthorized the Violence Against Women Act. The 2018 reauthorization is just being held up in the Senate. It passed the House, but not the Senate. So that's number one.
Why?
Well, let's get together and ask Mitch McConnell, shall we? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I have speculation about the fact that it includes more protections for LGBTQ victims, that it includes more protections for Native women and for immigrants, some of whom might not be legal. And that is my guess. It's also that there are gun provisions that the Republicans don't like. I mean, the Democrats want to put stricter gun controls for those who are convicted of domestic violence abuse or domestic abuse, and the Republicans are fighting that. So, I mean, that's my sort of speculative short answer, but that's certainly something that they can do. I think we also can do some national databases, like a national database of stalkers, for example. You know, nearly 80% of victims are stalked in the year prior to being killed. So that seems to me something that would be very simple to implement nationally, is a stalking database. Because right now, as it stands, if you are convicted of stalking in Iowa and you move to Tennessee, no one in Tennessee knows that or has access to those records, and that's a problem.
Well, it's a fascinating book. Rachel Louise Snyder. The book is No Visible Bruises: What We Don't Know About Domestic Violence Can Kill Us. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
All right, folks. Going to head into the fun half of the program. Disturbing stuff that I think is sort of gives you a sense of sort of some other problems that exist in the context of society. It is going to be interesting to see if there's what kind of research comes out of an increase in domestic violence over the past 2 years for whatever reason, after it being stable theoretically for a number of years. It'll be interesting to see if that bears out with in retrospect with more research, but it's certainly consistent with, and we haven't quite scheduled this interview, but another psychiatrist that I interviewed, clinical psychiatrist who's done a lot of studies showing that there are pre-existing predispositions that people have that involve racial prejudice, but it is the societal context which not necessarily dictates, but certainly raises the chances that these type of prejudices are going to be acted upon. And it would be, I think, worthwhile to down the road to circle back on some research, whether we're just living in a particularly difficult time when it comes to folks who are marginalized and who have been traditionally disempowered in society.
Yeah, there's also some interesting data on spikes in domestic violence after a war, which makes a whole lot of sense because people come home, men come home with PTSD, and they don't have the proper treatment for it.
2017 would not be the year to see that, though. I mean, we would have seen that probably closer to like 2008, as you started to have first round of people coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, or 2000. I mean, through the aughts.
There's so many causes. I mean, we live in a horrifically violent society. We have an imperial military that's sort of raging against the dying of the light. We have police who are just totally unaccountable. We have so many problems. So it's
right. But why is 2015? Why is the decade before 2016 different from the year 2017?
I don't know. I'm speaking more in general terms, but I wouldn't be surprised if Trump's election created some kind of spike in the patriarchy.
Yeah. All right. We're going to take a break. Just a reminder, you can support this program by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you not only make this show possible, but we say thank you by giving you some extra content. Jointhemajorityreport.com. It is your support. If you listen to the show, if you watch the show on a regular basis, by all means, we would appreciate your support. Also, remind you that you also will get the show commercial free if you're so inclined. You'll always have the opportunity to look at our special deals if we have any in our show descriptions. But that reminds me that Capterra is the leading free online resource to help you find the best software solution for your business. With over 850,000 reviews of products from real software users and more than 700 specific categories of software. 700 basically fields of business that you could be engaged in. Small business, big business, that, and then multiple different softwares that would help you do that business with thousands of reviews of all of them. Visit Capterra.com/majority for free to make an informed software decision for your business today. That's Capterra, CAPTERRA.com/majority. Capterra, software selection simplified. Today is Tuesday. Michael is back. He's talking. So apparently there'll be a show tonight.
Tonight on TMBS, there is going to be a commentary that will focus on the fallout of the European elections, the rise of liberal parties, a strategy for the left, and Brexit. We'll get into that. Then Hassan Piker makes his debut on the show. We are going to gorge ourselves on the Dave Rubin meltdown, but also explain why that actually matters. It has some stakes and the kind of broader strategy of dealing with YouTube. And then the great Milton Alamati, who I hope people have heard before on both TMBS and the Majority Report, founder of Black Star News, teacher at John Jay College. We're talking about Thomas Sankara, who's sometimes called the Che of Africa and the history of African awakenings and a bunch of other topics. So Michael Brooks' show, live 7 p.m. on the YouTube channel. Get the whole thing at patreon.com/TMBS.
Jamie.
This week on the Antifada, we have part 2 of History as a Weapon, number 4, that Sean has been doing, this awesome series with Matt Chrisman from Chapo Trap House. And they finish off this extended look into the 1970s by talking about all kinds of things, really. Why Carterism fell apart over its own internal contradictions, where the politics of personal virtue have taken us, why Reagan was the man of the hour, and why Clintonism was his enduring achievement, and the birth of neoliberalism and all of the different factors driving it. And yeah, I think the 70s are really important to understanding what's happening today, because I think a lot of Marxist economists were right on the money when they said there was a crisis of capitalist accumulation that started in the 70s. And neoliberalism was kind of like when you don't want to take out the trash yet, so you like push it down a little. That's what Matt Chrisman compared it to. It was like, you know, stopgap measure, but it was temporary, and that's why it's falling apart now. So check it out, patreon.com/theantifada. And it is a bonus for our patrons, but if you cannot afford to spend the money, DM us and we will hook it up.
Matt?
Yeah, there's a new Orweller episode. We're doing Such Were the Joys about George Orwell on his time at a preparatory school as a kid. It's basically, he wrote it toward the end of his life when he was dying. It's sort of 1984 set in a boarding school.
All right.
That sounds so traumatic.
Quick break. Fun half. Don't forget, justcoffee.coop. Fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code MAJORITY. Get 10% off. Get the Majority Report blend. See you in the fun half. Back, Sam Seder on the Majority Report. The number is 646-257-3920. 646-257-3920 is the number. We will take your phone calls. We will take your IMs. But first, we will start with this. Donald Trump in England, joint press conference with Theresa May. I guess it's the last time they'll have to spend time with each other. It's hard to know which one of them is probably happier. Donald Trump just turning more and more into a weeble. Weird to see him. I don't like the side is even more disturbing. And he has no idea what he's talking about. He doesn't. It's really shocking. But he stumbles on what is I think a deep agenda. Here it is. He's asked in a press conference about the NHS and in the context of any type of trade deal. Now, of course, in this situation, following a Brexit, we don't know if it's going to be a hard Brexit or a soft Brexit or no Brexit, or we really have no idea. But it's going to happen in October, but we have no idea because it was supposed to happen in May. But the bottom line is, in the event it is a hard Brexit or a fairly hard Brexit.
Did you say heartbreaking?
The other countries making a deal with England may have a lot of leverage. And there is talk amongst White House folks and probably in the conservative movement that if we can leverage the destruction of the national health system that the British have, that'll be good for free market capitalism. And so I don't know if Trump knows what he's talking about here or not, because he doesn't seem to know what the NHS is. He has to ask Theresa May.
Mr. President, Francis Elliott from The Times. Do you agree with your ambassador that the entire economy needs to be on the table in a future trade talk, a trade deal, including the NHS? And Prime Minister, are you tempted to take the Prime Minister President up at his word and stick around for a bit until the trade deal is done?
I think we're going to have a great trade deal, yes. I think we're going to have a great and very comprehensive trade deal. I can't hear him. What?
It's the National Health Service. He says, should the National Health Service be on the table?
Look, I think everything with the trade deal is on the table. When you're dealing in trade, everything's on the table. So NHS or anything else, or a lot more than that. But everything will be on the table, absolutely. Okay.
He doesn't know.
But that's the classic. It's like, yes, he's an idiot and it's hilarious. And yeah, it's totally on the table. I mean, going back to even this is an area where, and it's a useful distinction in some of our arguments, because the Blair government put way more money in the NHS. That was a shift, just labor. But he started to introduce private services in the NHS, and Cameron kept up that process. And a lot of people who've supported Brexit on the market side, they absolutely see it as an opportunity to bring in companies like Aetna.
This is how this dynamic works, too, is that Trump becomes the vehicle for people in the British government or just in British politics who want to privatize the NHS. Trump becomes the vehicle for this, right? And so that there is cover for British politicians, depending on who it is, let's say Boris Johnson maybe, to say, we have no choice. We have to just chip away. It's not a big concession, but we've opened the market to, whatever it is, Aetna or whomever.
It's actually pretty smart the way they're doing that. And it shows the extent to which their populist rhetoric was so hollow all along. Like, if you talk to working class people who voted for Brexit, they say one of the reasons they voted for it is because the NHS was underfunded. and they didn't have enough money to cover native-born citizens. And now we're just seeing that that's absolutely not the reason why these Brexiteer politicians
Well, I always use the
did it.
example.
You got punked.
I always use the example just to echo and fill in, like the day after, within literally 24 to 48 hours, it was either Nigel Farage or Boris Johnson or both who had been running around the country saying this amount of money goes to the EU, half of that could go to the NHS.
Right.
And they immediately were just like, yeah.
No, we
actually,
said
no.
could.
Yeah,
So
right.
It was a hypothetical.
Aspirational.
Yes.
Great book by Zero Books called How to Dismantle the NHS in 10 Easy Steps, which people should start reading and arming themselves, particularly in the UK.
So, Donald Trump, as you know, is in, like we said, is in Britain, and Jeremy Corbyn, perhaps in response, was this in direct response to this comment by Donald Trump that the NHS is on the table, or just in response to the idea that savvy people understand that this is one of the dynamics that's going to be used, right? You always need somebody to blame. And if it's Trump demanding NHS be cut, then that's what some of the, Boris Johnson's going to have to do in the event that he's the prime minister. But here is Jeremy Corbyn basically telling Donald Trump, kiss off.
We're in the midst of a debate about the future of our relationship between Britain and Europe and the rest of the world. The basis of that debate should surely be that we encourage the protection of jobs and living standards and public services and reach out to people all across the world. But it should not be a debate about how we go forward with no deal at the same time as offering up our precious, wonderful National Health Service to private American companies to come in and take it over. We will not stand for that. We will fight with every last breath of our body to defend the principle of a healthcare system free at the point of need for everybody as a human right.
There you go. Good for them. It's nice to see it coming from a distance. Gives you a little more time to react. And lastly, speaking of coming from a distance, Donald Trump, as you know, flying into England. Everyone's getting into the protest. Here is the work of an 18-year-old young man named Ali Nankaro. He is from, he lives around Stansted Airport in Essex, and apparently the president and going to be flying in around there. He mowed out a message for Donald Trump in his family's land. He took a picture of what he mowed with a drone, and it was it's become pretty viral. Here it is. Are you showing that picture now? There he is. There's the young man, and it is a facsimile. It says Trump, and then it has a very large penis that is there, and
we're sure this isn't more UFO evidence in crop circles.
He also had a climate change. Do we have a picture of the climate change? Yeah, we also have he has a picture of climate change. So he spent the weekend carving this message out, and he had to get through his A-level business exam. I don't know what that means, but I imagine it's like finals or something like that. And this is what he said. He said, "All my teachers have been shaking my hand and congratulating me. My phone's been off as I've had this exam, but all my friends have been showing me the news articles." He also went on to write climate change is real in the mowing that, and a picture of a polar bear. And he was asked if he thinks it will get in the way of his remaining A levels, which is, I would imagine, his other finals. Ollie said no, and if it does, I'm not too bothered. This was more important. It took him only 3 to 4 hours to complete the project. didn't take as long as you think. He said it was all done freehand with no planning. I just went for it.
And I don't want to in any, this is just future creative possibilities, but if you're going to do a penis-based installation art to upset Donald Trump next time, I would suggest to go back to not a trendy topic anymore, but go back to last summer and read excerpts of the Stormy Daniels book, where she has some pretty grotesque descriptions of Trump's particular appendage, and you could add that to the visual joke.
Let's go to the phones. What's that?
Toad from Mario Kart.
Calling from 210 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Good afternoon, Sam. It's John from San Antonio.
John from San Antonio. How are you, John?
Yeah, I'm okay. Okay, on a May 19th clip you posted called Dear Beto, Stop Wasting Your Time and Run for Senate. While I agree that it's extremely important for the Democrats to win the Senate, and if anything can be passed and there's a Democratic president, it is very important, and also because of the courts that you always talk about. But I also think you're not really telling the complete story of these races. You know, at the first Our Revolution Texas convention, one of the topics that was discussed was who should we endorse for the Senate race in 2018. Many people spoke on behalf of Sima Hernandez, who's a Bernie supporter, who's running again in 2020. She got 23.7% of the vote, and I personally voted for her. You've given me a lot of time to promote Our Revolution and Justice Democrats on this show, and you and Michael have spent a significant amount of time promoting progressives before and after elections. You not only mentioned Beto in that piece, but also Hickenlooper and Steve Bullock in Colorado and Montana, who are presidential candidates who are running for the Senate. So let's start with Colorado. Cory Gardner is the most vulnerable Republican senator running in 2020. In polling, he's running against a generic Democrat, and he has, every poll has him as a generic Democrat, with leads larger than a margin of error. So he's a terrible, centrist candidate. And so Democrats already have 12 Senate candidates, including progressives, Andrew Romanoff, who won the Democratic primary for the 6th District in 2014, and Stephanie Rose Spalding, who was endorsed by the Justice Democrats for a House race last year. And other potential candidates are Joe Neguse, a 34-year-old freshman who immigrated from Eritrea and is one of the first sponsors of the Green New Deal. He's not perfect, but he takes fossil fuel money. But if you look at his overall voting record, he's still fairly good. Diana DeGette also has a fair voting record and would be a much better choice than Hickenlooper. So from a practical point of view, Beto was tied with Cornyn in the last Quinnipiac poll in February for that race, for the Senate race. Now, MJ Hagar, who is currently running, is down by 17 points. Now, she ran in the 31st District and only lost by 3 points last year. And also freshwoman Veronica Escobar is the latest, is probably the most progressive Texas congressperson, and I hope she ends up running. So, in Montana.
So wait, John, what's the point? The point is that we have better choices than Beto, you're saying, for the Senate in Texas?
Well, I think I'm saying that, I understand your perspective, but what I'm also saying is, we need to elect progressive candidates. And so, you're always promoting progressive candidates, and that's great. That's one of the greatest things about the show. But, we should also be promoting these progressive candidates who are running for the Senate.
I agree.
Let's take in Illinois, we have this lady.
Wait. So you're suggesting that we don't want Beto to run in a primary in Texas because he's going to knock out the progressive running against him.
No, I'm not saying. I mean, he can run. Anybody can run if they want to run. That's up to them.
Of course. I don't have the ability
But-
anymore to keep people from running in primaries. That was taken away from me because of I don't want to talk.
When we
about
hit
that.
3,000 patrons on TMBS, I can personally ban people from running across the country. I'm pretty excited about that.
I just get to wear sleeveless shirts when that happens with me. But so I'm not clear on what your point is. Like
Well, there is a level of political calculation. I mean, we've been talking about political calculation as far as Biden, as far as impeachment, and so when you talk about the Senate, this is also a level of political calculation.
In Colorado, I think you have more of an opportunity, but it also depends on too. Like, I mean, to be honest with you, I haven't done a deep dive into the primary candidates there and who's going to split votes to whom. But I think Beto, it seems to me, has a very good chance, or as good a chance as anybody. Let's put it this way, to beating John Cornyn. Right? Cornyn is not as odious as Ted Cruz. It's going to be, I think, a tougher race. The idea that Beto has been able to, raise funds. Now, with all that said, it's also possible, and I'm certainly open to the argument, that Beto has, sort of tarnished his image a little bit, right? Like one of the things that made Beto exciting, I think, to people was like, this guy's going to be a superstar. And there's nothing that sort of like, undercuts that message than a sophomore slump a little bit. So I don't know, but
can I just say, just because I think it might have been actually, I think it was a video that we did on a Thursday, and I mean, it doesn't mean, I mean, it's also just like a much more simplistic, generic point, and it's, I know I don't usually necessarily go in this direction, but I'm just making a broad party point that, like, if you have any interest, that there's a cascade of people, some of whom I really don't like, some of whom I think are okay, who are talking about running for president, and they're in a position to run for the Senate and potentially do a lot more good. I mean, I agree with Sam, though, that Colorado and Texas seem quite different. And Hernandez is good, but I've heard some other things about Hernandez that might even implicate Sam that I'm a little wary of in the Seth Rich fiasco.
I don't know what that means, but
she's great, but she said some conspiratorial things. So there are some reasons why people have backed off.
Look,
you gotta look at all these candidates.
Here's the thing, okay? Get me a Democrat, someone who is going to put, God help me, Chuck Schumer as the majority leader in the Senate. All right.
Forget it. All bets are off. I support all progressives, period.
Well, I mean, the bottom line is it doesn't matter. You can have a progressive coming from Texas, and Chuck Schumer is going to be the leader. It's not going to be a freshman senator who's going to make a difference in terms of Chuck Schumer's leadership. I can assure you that right now. But the point is, who's the best candidate? Part of the way you figure that out is during a primary. And so, yes, I get your point, John. And but I also, I think what Michael said is more or less operative. But we will have time to get into that primary soon. Okay, I promise you, all of them.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Bye.
All right. One thing. Can I admit one thing about my call on Friday?
Right.
At the end of the call, after you hung up, Matt said that they said something like the polling, or not the polling, I'm sorry. Let me see here. 242-16. We're at a low ebb for third partyism, even historically, speaking for the last 50 years. So what you're referring to, like, as far as 50-year increments, right, going back to, let's say, 69, and then going back, let's say, 69 to the 1920 election, is that what you're referring to?
I mean, I was referring to mainly like Nixon had to compete with Wallace, and then there was Ross Perot in the 90s. And
also, Anderson in 1980 was a much more significant one,
Yep.
and Nader in 2000 more significant.
Well, actually, Nader wasn't. I mean, actually, Johnson got more votes. That was in the call. But yeah, I mean, just going back, if you take it back 50 years, it's 4 points from the 1920 election to the 68 election. Third-party votes are 4%. And it's essentially about 5% going back from 72 to 16.
All right. Well,
So
Matt,
close,
Matt
but-
stands corrected. I can assure you.
Matt's also wrong about impeachment, John.
Guess who's
so
going
I
to
would
be
focus on
My face
Matt a
is really
lot.
red right now.
Matt's.
Guess who's going to be
Matt's-
docked a couple of Twinkies around here? I can assure you of that, John. I appreciate the call.
We got to talk, Matt. That was embarrassing.
He's in trouble.
Jesus
He's going to be in
Christ.
big trouble, John. Don't you worry about that. It's not going to.
I mean, I'll
he's
just
not
say,
getting away with that.
I said the last 50 years because I didn't know enough to say
Yeah,
prior to that.
Yeah, but if you said the last 100
Good,
years,
nice
then
try.
you really would have been wrong.
You can't get away with that. Not around here.
I
buddy.
like that. You specifically gave yourself a time frame that you would make a legitimate point in, and it was like, oh, but you were wrong if you expanded the time frame.
That's why I didn't expand it.
There you go.
That's pretty awesome.
Well,
man.
that's a nice way to lie with statistics. Calling from an 845 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam, it's Lauren. How you doing?
Hi, Lauren. How are you?
I'm all right. That was a hell of an interview. That was tough to listen to at times.
Yeah, difficult stuff.
Yeah, it was like just checking off boxes for me, but that's not why I called. I am calling to promote the Mid-Hudson Valley DSA's next Brake Light Clinic, which is this Saturday in the city of Newburgh from 11 to 3 at the municipal parking lot on Ann Street.
Sunny Newburgh, New York, ladies and gentlemen. Go check it out.
Sunny Newburgh, New York.
How are
on
those
the
going,
glittering
Lauren?
Hudson River.
How many are you getting? A lot of people showing up for those?
So this is our third one. We've been doing them on the second Saturday of the month, and Poughkeepsie was great. Kingston was a little slower, and I have a good feeling about Newburgh. I think we've been doing, I'm not involved with the publicity so much, but it seems like that's going well. And it's in a good location, got a nice big parking lot. I think we're going to be all right.
All right, great. Well, we'll put a link to it. If you want to email us, we'll put a link to it.
Awesome. It's on Facebook, and I can send you a link to the event page, and the chapter has a website.
Terrific.
too.
Hudson Valley DSA. Thank you. Thanks, Lauren.
Mid-Hudson.
Mid-Hudson. Thank you.
I want to take a vacation
Thank you.
and see what DSA is like in the Mid-Hudson. I kind of fantasize sometimes about like what it'd be like to be in a small, not overexposed chapter of the DSA and do organizing in that way.
Sounds like someone's going to move up to Kingston. It's a happening town.
I like it up there.
The original capital of New York.
It's pretty beautiful up there.
Calling from a 978 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, Sam. It's Maddie from Massachusetts.
Hello, Maddie. What's on your mind?
I am calling in to add to our sort of ongoing Nancy Pelosi impeachment debate.
Yep.
So I'm getting increasingly worried that the Democrats have been so weak and so inept for so long that when we inevitably do get to the point where we're starting impeachment proceedings, they don't know enough to execute the kind of political and media strategy that is necessary to sort of have a successful impeachment campaign.
Maddie, let me just say this. I think that your fear is well-founded. I can't imagine a worse way of going into impeachment than what Pelosi is doing. I mean, some people speculate that she's been, and I thought she had turned a little bit, maybe, but this is not there is no indication from the reporting that I'm seeing that there's anything other than what we see going on, which is her dragging her feet, her putting the brakes on investigations across the board, fighting against what is, I think, starting to be like some type of like, mutiny may be a strong word, but, some significant dissent within the Democratic caucus. Her number one job in her mind is to protect her her majority. And then I think things go up, which I think, fair enough. But I think that her analysis is just wrong. You have members of the Judiciary Committee, backbenchers, freshmen, who are from purple districts, who are also calling for impeachment. I mean, they know about this. I mean, it's, but who knows?
Yeah, I'm worried, or I would say that my perspective is that there is so much room for the poll numbers to move. Like, I don't understand why she is taking the poll numbers as static. I think that video that you guys played of that old lady in the guy from Michigan's district,
Amash.
Is Amash's district. Yes, thank you. Is totally like proof that there's so much room for them to move people on this issue. And what they should be doing is going on TV every day, have 3 talking points, make them really simple. This is an example of something he did, that's obstruction. This is an example of something else he did, that's obstruction. This is an example of something that he did, that's corruption. And have 3 really specific, concrete examples, and then just never stop saying them for months and months and months until people finally start getting the message that this guy's a scumbag. And they just don't seem to have the know-how or
they don't. I don't think they have the will.
That is the media strategy that they should be going
I don't think
after.
she has the will. I don't think she has the will because I think she's convinced that her way is a better way of maintaining that majority. And the problem is that I think the calculation is all on the side that you've just mentioned, right? That you can get people, impeachment can be a winner, et cetera, et cetera. What I think is, and I keep saying this over and over again, but what I think is not being assessed is the cost. Like the idea, never mind that there's an argument that there's an upside, right? That people can become more willing to impeach. Maybe that's the case. The big problem is just what do you do between now and the election if you don't impeach? What does she think is going to happen? Because these things only move in one direction or another. They don't nothing is going to be frozen in amber from this moment until the election. The trend is going to move in one way or another. And there's not going to be any legislative battles. Apparently, they have no bills to take to the floor of the House. They've passed them all, the entire agenda. So there doesn't seem to be a plan, and it's very, very problematic.
I think that they are so used to Pelosi and Schumer definitely are basing a lot of their strategy on just the model of the other side is just too appalling to contemplate. But I do think that they should have more up or down votes that are embarrassing and hard for Republicans. But on the third thing, just to amplify what you were saying, and I wasn't here for the clip of the woman in Amash's district, but in the sense of people,
she said that she did not know,
right,
that there was anything negative in the Mueller report about Donald Trump,
right. And and this is where where it gets tricky, because of course I agree we need to be real about the base of the Republican Party and the attitudes that are driving Trump, but then there is this we played. I don't know if we played this on air, but this was from a CNN focus group 7 months ago. And it was former Trump voters primarily, or people who had voted for Trump, and most of that group happened to be souring on him. And one of the guys in the group is like, well, I won't vote for him for re-election because he's a racist. And even the CNN host is kind of you voted for him, and she didn't say it that bluntly, but what's making you think that now? He called LeBron stupid.
Right.
He's not that's not cool. LeBron isn't stupid, and that clearly tipped the guy. So if you go out, I agree. If you have hearings, I'm looking into archival footage of Iran-Contra, which wasn't even an impeachment, and that leaves a lot of everlasting images about the Reagan administration.
Well, yes. Unfortunately, Oliver North got up there and browbeat, but I don't think there is an Oliver North figure in this.
No, there isn't.
But my biggest fear is just, what do you do if you don't impeach? Because Nancy Pelosi thinks you can play 4 corners on this.
They're appalling. And you can't vote for
run
them.
out the
That's
time.
Her thing.
But the problem is, she doesn't have the ball. And so That's the problem with that strategy. But I appreciate the call, Maddie. I share your concern. Call your Congress people.
Yeah. I will. Thank you so much.
Thanks for calling. So we mentioned this. Wait, what was that? The BuzzFeed thing?
Yeah, Bernie is publicly...
Bernie's making this. Bernie is so on this right now.
About
It's
a month
amazing.
ago, BuzzFeed News Union, we shared news about our progress toward recognition of our union. But since then, the company has dragged its feet and failed to address some of our most pressing concerns. It's now been 112 days since we went public. The BuzzFeed and Bernie retweeted this with a comment. Let's not forget the middle class was built by organized labor. I'm very concerned to see the BuzzFeed still hasn't recognized the union formed by its newsroom employees. Our Workplace Democracy Act will put an end to corporations getting away with these stalling tactics. I mean, this is so much of unionization is the process is stymied by administrative issues. And so much of this can be addressed on some level with just the National Labor Relations Board, but also legislation that basically just changes the methodology in which people unionize. And you don't need to come out with the legislation that says, unions are automatic or unions are prohibited to have to basically dictate the destiny of unionization. I mean, one of the things about the Taft-Hartley Act that makes it so difficult to unionize are these sort of like artificial roadblocks that are put up there and things that sort of create a structural context that weaken the union movement in this country. And they have been exacerbated over time. We're going to have, I think, I'm not sure when they come up, National Labor Relations Board appointees. But at one point, it's possible, I think maybe even in this term, I'm not sure, Donald Trump is going to be able to appoint and have a majority of Republicans on there again, and then forget it. This is going to be a crap show. I want to talk about this reporting from Ken Klippenstein over at TYT Investigates. They have gotten a hold of a document. This is an internal document. That is, these are internal agency documents that show that at least 3, it appears, deaths that took place amongst ICE detainees were preventable. This is according to an internal document. One ICE official apparently told TYT the problem is systemic. This is a letter written to this guy, Matthew Albence. Who is Matthew Albence? He was the acting deputy director of ICE. Let's look at a clip of Albence, shall we? This is where he likened these detention centers to summer camp.
With regard to the FRCs, I think the best way to describe them is to be more like a summer camp. These individuals have access to 24/7 food and water. They have educational opportunities. They have recreational opportunities, both structured as well as unstructured.
Wow, that sounds like camp. Did they also make macrame? According to this internal document, ICE's Health Service Corp is severely dysfunctional and unfortunately preventable harm and death to detainees has occurred. This is a letter sent to Matthew Albence. The memo bears the subject line, urgent matter, was written by a supervisor at ICE's Health Services Corp.
Looks like there's a number of attachments. I wonder if those are images.
It's possible. It details over a dozen, because a lot of this is redacted. It details over a dozen cases in which ICE allegedly failed to provide its detainees with proper medical care, including 3 which resulted in fatalities. One of these cases involves alleged ICE, quote, negligence in handling a medical incident resulting in a detainee's death at ICE's Eloy Detention Center in Arizona. According to the document, ICE did not heed warnings from an official about an apparent case of neuroleptic malignant syndrome. The memo plainly says of another ICE detainee, quote, suicide victim, Mr. Efrain de la Rosa could have been saved. The document goes on to state that ICE, quote, received a total of 12 significant event notification reports prior to his death. 12. Depicting suicidal ideation and psychosis. Moreover, De La Rosa was not being treated with psychotropic medication. Instead, he was remanded to segregation. Isolation, in other words. Which psychiatrists consider to be torture. Mr. De La Rosa's suicide closely mirrors the previous suicide of Mr. Joseph Jimenez at Stewart Detention Center. This is referencing the third fatality that was allegedly preventable. In yet another case, writes Klippenstein, the detainee was removed from respiratory isolation despite having tuberculosis, which, as you know, is highly contagious. Documents note that ICE is having identified a trend of detainees not treated for alcohol and drug withdrawal. The memo goes on to state many detainees have encountered preventable harm and death. IHSC leadership is not focused on preventing horrible reoccurrences. This is an agency that is systemically corrupt and dysfunctional. It's time to get rid of it. It's time to get rid of it.
And for real, not like rename it, slightly reshuffle it. The whole operation of a
Chop it up.
paramilitary force to terrorize immigrant communities needs to be destroyed root and branch, and the whole process needs to be demilitarized.
Here's Ilhan Omar making the same point this afternoon, I guess, just about half an hour ago. ICE as an organization has become increasingly militarized, brutal, and unaccountable. It must be abolished. I don't know if it's become more so. It probably has, according to folks like Ronald Reagan, but certainly we're more aware of it. So either way, Donald Trump could get up there and say, Barack Obama's ICE is horrible. I'm disbanding it, and I'll be happy. I don't care.
Why didn't you deal with this problem when it was less visible?
I had to make it visible so it would be dealt with. Sunlight's the best disinfectant.
So Jared Kushner, apparently in his big interview with Jonathan Swan from Axios for the Axios HBO show, if you've ever wondered why do we see so little of Jared Kushner, is he a man of mystique?
It's a secret weapon.
He's shy. I think it's because everyone around him, the one thing that I feel like all the Trump people have the ability to do is not to not be stupid, but to know enough that everyone around them is stupid and keep them off TV. Everybody but me. And here is Swan asking what should be a fairly easy slam dunk question. Even if you are guilty of having done something wrong, it's so easy in our society to say, you know what? I've learned. Now, I think in the heat of that first campaign, I didn't know how to respond to this. Now I'm more mature and I've learned. So the answer is yes, I would. Here is the question.
set off at least some alarm bell when you see an email saying that the Russian government wants to help the campaign?
Like I said, the email that I got on my iPhone at the time basically said show up at 4. I didn't scroll down. I never would have thought about that.
It had Russia in the subject line.
Again, I would get about 250 emails a day. And so I literally saw show up at 4. I showed up at 4.
Would you call the FBI if it happened again?
I don't know. It's hard to do hypotheticals, but the reality is that we were not given anything that was salacious.
It's hard to do hypotheticals. It's hard to read subject lines of emails that you open up. I want that email program where you don't have to read any of the actual email. It just takes you right to the action line.
Well, and you just know also even like what room to go in.
I don't.
It's just there at 4.
That's the way I get my.
All right.
That's the way I pay my bills.
Yes.
I don't see Verizon or
Do you think that's how Jordan Peterson talked to Orban? There's
Yes.
like there at 4. He's like,
It's just
okay,
just come to Hungary. I don't know. I didn't really read the subject line. It said, Hungary, humanities professors mean. There.
Let's go to the IMs. Donald Trump. Someone talk some sense into Jimmy Dore fanboy Kyle Kulinski. Only notable voice on the left scared of impeaching Trump on obstruction of justice. Someone tell him that insufficient evidence is not no evidence. Clearly doesn't understand that absence of a crime does not negate obstruction. He is convinced that it will pad Trump's popularity and lead to a Trump victory in 2020. Historically, there is nothing to support this cerebral rule. However, somehow he thinks impeaching over emoluments and Yemen would have a favorable fate. Again, with no historical perspective to frame this nonsense argument.
That's not true.
Left is best, and so is MR, and I still think Meghan McCain is the next great Cardinal short yardage offensive guard.
I like the end part. I mean, we've talked about this, though. It's not that it's that people are misreading the lessons of Bill Clinton, but it's not that there's none.
I mean, there's no I mean, I think you have to. It's a pretty bad misread. I mean,
but it's probably the misread that we've said Nancy Pelosi's making. I mean, plenty of people are, have that perspective, and I
think
also,
Nancy
again,
Pelosi is afraid of losing in some of those purple districts, and
right.
Maybe
that's the Bill Clinton lesson. Precisely.
Maybe she's worried about losing Jimmy Dore.
But also,
she's like, I'm really concerned that if we do that, then Jimmy Dore will call me a fucking sellout, and then the whole process will come tumbling down like a giant stack of cards. I'm not a fucking sellout, Jimmy.
But also, it's not a perfect analogy in a lot of different ways to Clinton's impeachment. And one of those ways is in 1998, Clinton had been mired in scandal for many more years than Trump has at this point in time, like publicly so. So people were
I don't know about that. I don't know about that at all. I mean, Donald Trump, certainly his whole political career, and if you expand it to his life.
But I don't understand what that has to do with any of it.
Like the idea that people will be tired of the scandals and just it'll have some kind of bump up effect for Trump.
Yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. I mean, I think at the end of the day, it was that most sane people did not care about.
I feel like it's more in your face now.
Well, most sane people did not care about the BJ. That was the big thing. It was like, are you seriously going to halt the functioning of the U.S. government over a blowjob?
Well, that's also...
And on top of that, Bill Clinton was, in fact, doing stuff. There's no great sense with 55% of the population right now that Donald Trump is doing anything that he would be inhibited from doing if there was an impeachment proceeding.
I mean, ideology aside, there's definitely a perception that Bill Clinton was an effective president. If you impeach Trump, was it going to distract him from calling people losers on Twitter?
The majority of people,
it's like that. Like it's a total like Bill Clinton. The whole message that actually worked was he would always say it was just like, I'm going to get back to doing the job the American people elected me to do. And
there were stories
I'm sorry
after stories
that this is such a distraction, but I have like a meeting with the Vietnamese
There was story
premier
after story that he had this amazing ability to compartmentalize.
Right.
That was like,
they pushed that.
In fact, I mean, we can't go back but if you were to go and look at one of those like graphs of like a word, the word usage of compartmentalized during those years, it would have like just gone off the charts. I think it might have been coined during that time. I mean, it feels like it.
But if Kyle is talking about impeaching, I mean, to me, substantively, the thing I would be most interested in impeaching Trump. I'm not saying we're going to do it, but substantively, supporting a genocide in Yemen, hell yeah. And a monument is something you could probably get him on directly, not an obstruction about something that wasn't established. So that also sounds reasonable to me too.
Well, obstruction is, I mean, it was in the Nixon impeachment hearings.
Absolutely.
There was underlying crime that he was convicted of.
Well, he wasn't convicted of anything. He left.
Well, I understand. I mean, that's the thing is it's just absurd.
He rolled out.
It's just the idea that obstruction, and the obstruction's not just limited to the Mueller investigation at this point. It's also the investigation into the census question. I mean, on and on. The EPA is refusing to hand over documents. I mean, there's a whole host of things. But obstruction in and of itself, of course, you can't lie to in the course of an investigation because you don't think the investigation is legit. I mean, it's absurd. That's exactly what Bill Clinton was impeached for. He was impeached, and it was for lying in a deposition that did not have any material basis on the start of the Whitewater investigation. Whitewater was a real estate deal that happened 15 years before he was in the White House, and he ultimately was impeached because in a deposition, he lied about an affair that he had like a year after the investigation started. Jonathan Armstead, if my vote means anything, have Brendan tag today's interview for the best of. Wow, this lady was so smart and so in-depth on such a depressing topic. I'm grabbing this from my library ASAP. Sasha Greyjoy. Hey, Sam, it's my birthday today. Can I please get a shofar? I listen to the show every day. Happy birthday. Colin from Nebraska. Once we colonize the moon, the men and women being terrorized in their homes can go there. I don't quite get it. Gregory from Oklahoma. Beto came to Oklahoma, met with a few of the leaders within our stats, young Democrats and college Democrats. I'm not a Beto supporter, but I thought it was pretty cool. Nick from Manitoba. Hey, Sam, great show today. Do you laugh at your children's jokes even if they're not funny? No. No. Given that you're clearly the funniest member of the MR crew, what kind of comedy bar do you set for the future of the Seder name? Well, I'll tell you what I do.
Wow, that's a very debatable proposition.
Hot take.
Everybody's really sensitive about that.
No, it's debatable. No, I think it's a legitimate position, just a debatable one.
Well, of course, every position's debatable. That's what this whole show is about.
That's not true. A lot of this show is about shutting down conversation and controlling the frame.
Yeah, speaking of which, let me answer the question. That's a great question.
Me.
That's a great question. One of the things I do is when my kid tells me a joke that is not funny, I just stare at them for a moment. I give it a beat. The complete silence makes them feel a little bit squeamish. And then I go, was that an attempt at a joke? And so like Saul comes into my bed in the morning and he says, is it time for me to make jokes? And I'm like, usually like, give me 10 minutes. I need to sleep a little more. And then he'll say like, why did the rooster cross the road? This is one of his jokes. I'm like, why? Because he wanted to be like the chicken. And I was like, yeah, but why? Why does he want to be like the chicken? I don't get it.
What's the motivation? Yeah. Yeah.
And he's just like, no, he wants to be like the chicken. And I said, yeah, no, you said that. What's funny about it? And he looks like a puppy dog and this and that. I mean, it's important. One
he
of the
needs
things
to understand
you have to
that
teach,
just because it was a misdirect doesn't mean it's funny.
You have to teach the kid how to deal with a joke that's not going to land. So,
tough
actually,
crowd.
do you remember 5 or 6 years ago, I think I tweeted out, maybe this is longer, that I tweeted out that something about like, had to tell my daughter last night that her joke wasn't funny. I tweeted something to that effect. Like there was clearly like, daughter told me a joke tonight, wasn't very funny, made it clear to her it wasn't. It's the only way that she's going to learn. And like there was like a group of people.
People take that really seriously.
Yes. Yeah. Like people were like, you're a bad dad. And I'm like, look, what am I going to do? I think you're being a bad dad if you laugh at your kids' jokes and they go out in the world and they think they're funny and it turns out they're not.
You're like a very much like a conservative, like pull your pants up dad when it comes to humor. It's like, look, this isn't everybody gets a gold star. Not everybody gets a laugh. You got to learn.
You're doing your kid a
we've
disservice.
created an entitlement mentality society where every chicken crosses the road joke gets a laugh, even though it's not funny. And we're disincentivizing actual performance. It's a very Jordan Peterson approach to training your kids to being funny.
Steven Crowder's dad should have done a better job.
Yeah, Steven Crowder's dad must have been the most liberal parent in the world. Like, oh, because they wanted to be like the chicken. That's great, Steve.
About certain
Go
kinds
do
of jokes.
yeah.
Right.
I feel like we may have gotten a taste of that treatment before too. So you can tell Saul that he's in good company.
That's right. That's right. Back from VA, the shooter in Virginia Beach used a suppressor. One survivor described hearing something that sounded like a nail gun. While it does require getting a lawyer and paperwork to get one, I still know a couple of people who own suppressors. They need to outlaw these things. Yes, of course. Almost real Mayor Pete policies. Let's have a public option that is so cheap everyone can afford it, but providers have to give you a really bad care if you use it. This will ensure everyone has health care, will lower costs, but not too much, so private insurers can stay in business. Smoot court. If there's an additional step on that dangerous line out of right-wing YouTube, which is they also sell people weapons. I don't mean to be a broken record, but I mentioned this a few weeks ago about Ben Shapiro, but it's true for several of those guys. Steven Crowder is sponsored by Walter. He plugs them, wears their shirts, keeps a handgun on his desk during his show. This guy Crowder, the more and more I dig into this, the more and more disturbed. We're going to do a little bit more on him going forward, but still waiting on one possible development, which I don't want to...
But we're going to win either way, folks.
Oh, yeah. There's going to be so much winning. You're going to be sick of it. I promise you.
Yeah,
Speaking of
sick
it
will be sickening.
Speaking of sickening, we have one more clip from the California Democratic Convention. We played that John Delaney clip. Is that his name? Yep. That is now the third time I've probably said John Delaney's name.
He's been whining on Twitter all day, actually.
I bet. Now, I wondered when John Delaney got up there, and I still wonder about this. This doesn't make any sense to me. And, Brendan tried to explain it to me. But I don't know why you would go up there and say the thing. Why would you go up and say Medicare for all is bad policy and not sort of roll out your own idea, or just why even say Medicare for all is bad policy? Why not just come out and say, here's a good policy? As if there is a big, it just seems to me to be tin-earism. Even if the vast majority of California Democrats in that room are not socialists, are not socialist friendly, although I think you probably are not following California Democratic politics very well if you're not aware that at least some of the more vocal people are, at the very least, would see that as some type of knock on Bernie. Why go up with that and fly that banner if you're trying to appeal to sort of the more conservative Democrats? Are they really do you really need to that's the way you burnish those credentials? It seems very strange to me. The only other reason I could think is it's the only way they get attention. It's one of the things that you learn with kids.
Absolutely the only reason we're ever talking about that.
Everybody's doing the thing where they just redefine Medicare for all to be what they want it.
Yeah, it's attention economy, and that is literally. I mean, why else would we ever talk about Hickenlooper or Delaney? They're terrible politicians. They have bad policy. They're unfathomably boring. Why would we?
And so here is Hickenlooper trying to get on the Majority Report.
Socialism is not the answer. I was reelected in a purple state in 2014, one of the worst years for Democrats in a quarter century. If we're not careful, we're going to end up helping to reelect the worst president in American history. We should not try to tackle climate change by guaranteeing every American a government job. Hold on, hold on.
Wow.
Hear me out.
You know what?
It's a TV slot.
Well,
That's what it is. He's going to get 1% of the vote, but he wants another talking head job.
Yeah, maybe that's what it is. But maybe he believes that, but his it sounds like he's more suited to run for something in Colorado. Now John from San Antonio, don't get mad at me. But I mean, it's just, I just don't understand this. If you want to come across as the sort of like positive candidate, just lay out a positive agenda. But we used to call this hippie punching back in the day. And it's, why you would do that as a candidate makes no sense to me. Like, the argument is, we need to appeal to as many people as possible. So I'm going to stand out there and argue that bunch of you, I'm going to start my speech saying that we need to get as many people as possible by dissing some of you. That just doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't make any sense.
Let's immediately
whatsoever.
lose parts of the crowd.
Right, exactly. Like, I'm going to prove to you that I'm going to prove to you. Yeah, here's more Hickenlooper.
I just said. It's just striking to me though, because they're doing like a bad version of the famous, bad thing that Bill Clinton did to humiliate Jesse Jackson with Sister Soldier. But like, that was actually like, I'm just not talking morally here, but like, it's one thing to symbolically take on a powerful individual like Jesse Jackson that represents something. Bill Clinton didn't just go up there and say, oh yeah, and by the way, fuck the Rainbow Coalition. You people suck. Like, he did I mean, that's just bizarre. I don't see the root of, even if you're challenging an audience to say, I'd like your vote. You're all a bunch of idiots. And I have totally different values than you.
But it's even more specific than that. It's like, you shouldn't call people idiots, you idiots.
Yeah,
this is a guy who doesn't do politics well. Here he is on Chris Hayes' program.
Bringing people together, right? The question I always ask is like, what sort of magic do you have, or what trick have you figured out that everyone else hasn't, right? Barack Obama, I think everyone agrees, is, whether they liked him substantively or not, one of the most talented politicians in recent memory, had a huge mandate, had huge majorities, right? And Mitch McConnell basically did everything he could to obstruct him. Like, in what universe does John Hickenlooper not encounter the same problem?
Well, I think that in part it's who I am. I'm probably the one person running for president that never ran for student council in high school or college.
Wait a second. Do you really think like your personality is such that Mitch McConnell is going to bring stuff up to a vote because of who you are?
No. Mitch McConnell is the exception. And when we took on the NRA and they wouldn't compromise...
He's a powerful exception. He controls one of the two legislative branches of the United States Congress.
I understand that. And you certainly have to go talk to him just so that the people that follow him and respect him wouldn't feel diminished. But in the end, you've got to do what you've got to do to get stuff done. And I think, both as a small business person, I spent 17 years as an entrepreneur and a small business person, you learn different skills of negotiation and you build relationships in ways that other people don't. Look at Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan. They hated each other at first, right? They were at each other's throats, and yet in the end, over a period of time, they came to know each other and they got big things done.
Right, but Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan, and my colleague in the hour previous wrote a whole book about this. It's a very good book. I'd recommend. It's just a different political era, right? The polarization of the two parties hasn't settled in. You still got Southern Democrats who are sort of traditionally conservative. There's all sorts of structural things in 30 years that have changed, and I think the argument that people on the other side of this sort of debate have, right, is that if you go into these structurally polarized politics thinking with a 1983 model, you're going to get the floor wiped with you.
Yeah, I'm not using that model. I'm using the model of human nature. And when I ran for mayor in 2003, the suburban mayors were mostly Republicans, and they hated the city of Denver.
Forget it.
I can't again.
Please. Good for Chris Hayes in just sort of like just very politely saying like, you've got to be kidding me.
Well, the only part that wasn't polite was when he really emphasized the like, hey, you're 1983. He couldn't even give him 1990s concept of how the world. But the two things that I thought were great there, besides the obvious, was that one, was I am white. subtext. And then the second one was, did you see with like the tiniest bit of prodding? That's actually not different than what Bernie Sanders would say. It's like, sure, like I'm a politician. Of course, I'll open, like no one is running, even the most aggressive candidacy saying, I'm going to go in and just, offer bills and not speak to anybody in Congress and not, attempt to move through things through Congress. Like every single person is aware of how literally the logistics of the place works. So when he got pushed, it was like, yeah, well, I mean, I literally will have a meeting with Mitch McConnell. He's the Senate Majority Leader. It's like, yeah, I would imagine any president will be in the same room as Mitch McConnell at some point, buddy. It's like if that's his literally. I mean, rewatch that. As soon as he got
there
pushed,
was a time though.
Like,
I mean, that I think there was a lot more sentiment amongst, the mainstream media that like, that seems very reasonable. You're going to go in and sit down and have a tete-a-tete with him. I mean, it's a bizarre frame that is really anachronistic. And, the other thing, Joe Biden said this too, right? And I think it was a real missed opportunity. And maybe it's one of those situations where it's like, the prisoner dilemma. Nobody wants to take this opportunity. But it was a real missed opportunity for some of the candidates to not essentially say, wait a second, Joe, you're saying that you're better than Barack Obama? Yeah. Like what are you saying here? That you could do this better than Barack Obama blew it, in other words. I mean, if without the Republicans, without Donald Trump, you're going to be able to go in and deal with the Republicans and Mitch McConnell. So you're saying that Barack Obama was bad at it. Just because that's one of the two things that I think has to happen for Joe Biden to drop in the polls. One, and maybe not even need to be cleaved from Barack Obama, but to a certain extent. And he has to be shown as being vulnerable.
And they should find this clip specifically of Harry Reid going right to the edge of, after praising Obama, I think in very authentic terms, because, Reid's a conservative Democrat. He had some disagreements with Obama, but he said Obama's the best president I ever worked with, I believe was the quote. And then he said, but I really tried hard to convince him that he could not basically make deals with these people because of who they are. And the host, I think it was Axelrod, was kind of like, you saying that some of it had something to do with race. And Reid basically was like, I'm going to answer that in such a way where I can't explicitly, I'm not going to just say that, but yes, absolutely, 100%. And I think if you got a quote from somebody like Harry Reid that spoke to race, Obama's leadership quality, and why that approach failed, and you'd read it to Joe Biden and said, what do you think about this quote, Joe? That would be very effective on like all three grids of his argument.
Okay, well, bless me, Father, if I have sinned.
The more people know about Joe Biden, the less they're going to like him. I really believe that.
It's a whole other grid. There's left and right, and then there's also just like partisan or not. And
call him from a 478 area code. Who's this? 478?
Oh, I'm sorry, Sam. Hello. Hello, Sam. This is Jeff from Georgia. Hello.
Jeff from Georgia, thank you for calling in, because I forgot again, because nobody reminded me to plug on the first half of the show this week's Dissident Peasant, where I make an appearance to talk about
that's true.
the Bush
you
years.
very much did. The episode's actually getting rave reviews. I know a lot of people liked it. I know one call yesterday had some quibbles with me. I don't really think a response would be necessary, but I do want to thank her for listening and shouting me out. That was actually really nice.
Jeff, it wasn't you that disrespected Bart Cop. We all know who it was.
Yeah, I didn't mean to erase any liberal blogs from history, but, I got to be honest with you, Sam, I'm not doing so good other than that because, I've been thinking a lot about my boy Dave Rubin and the kinds of guests and the kinds of interviews my boy Dave Rubin, conducts. They're just not critical. There's no critical questions, no challenges for anyone. And I got to be honest with Sam, I love you, but I brought you on the show. I treat you pretty nice. I didn't ask you no hard questions. So I got just a couple hard questions for you now. Question number one, I'm just wondering about Dave Rubin. which of these inspires your hate boner for him harder? Would you say it's his incredible intellectual acuity or his just total lack of principles? Which one really gets your heart, your blood pumping, Sam?
I don't fault people for being dumb. It's what was the second question? What was the second option? The lack of integrity?
It's either how spectacularly stupid he is or how spectacularly unprincipled he is.
I think it's the second. I mean, I don't even care that he has no political principles. My problem with Dave Rubin is that he mainstreams really bad people. That's what I think is my biggest problem with him. And he also is disingenuously represents himself as something that he's not, as a way of mainstreaming bad people and bad ideas.
That's really bold of you, Sam. You guys here, stupid people are indeed people, Sam. I appreciate your honesty on that.
Yeah, no, I don't mind.
Second question for you. I'm just wondering, have you not ever seen any large, burly men over to Matthew Film Guy's residence to maybe help him finish any documentaries that he's behind on? Is that something you've ever contemplated doing or have done?
Certainly something I've contemplated doing. Certainly something I've contemplated doing. Let's put it
all right. I appreciate your honesty on that. My last question for you, Sam. How does it feel to host a show that simultaneously shills for the corrupt Democratic establishment and espouses starry-eyed communist nonsense on a regular basis? How does it feel to fail so badly at both of those things somehow at the same time?
Surprisingly good. Surprisingly
Hey, all
good.
right, folks. You heard it here first. Listen, Sam, I really appreciate you letting me ask you some tough questions. I know it couldn't have been easy for you, but in all honesty, folks, Sam came on my show incredibly quick. He said yes, incredibly enthusiastically. It's a pretty damn good episode, and I couldn't thank him enough.
Check it out, folks. Dissident Peasant.
Thank you, Sam. Y'all
Wherever
have
your
a good one
podcasts
now.
are sold. All right, final call of the day. We got people who have been on for over an hour, multiple people. Calling from a 909 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam, this is Chris from Riverside, California.
Chris, what's on your mind?
A couple things. First off, today is actually a big election day in Riverside, California, where we have 4 wards for city council up. 3 incumbents are not running for re-election, and the one that is, I think, is in a bit of a tough race right now. So,
Wow.
I'm not in one of the wards. I'm in Ward 4 or 6, I think, but I know there's this one progressive I know that's running that I'm sadly just right out of striking distance of being in the ward to vote for, but yeah, that's happening. Along with that, I wanted to figure out what your guys' take was on the UK and in regards to possibly Scotland leaving Great Britain or so during in case if Boris Johnson or Michael Gove becomes prime minister. So,
All right, we'll answer it off air. I mean,
I think that it is very possible on the trajectory that they're on that Scotland could go for another independence referendum and it could pass. That's super possible.
I feel like I have no idea what the hell is going on there.
Part of what kept Scotland in was actually Labour politicians like Gordon Brown going and talking about the NHS. And Scotland is, relatively speaking, definitely more socialist oriented and EU than, the UK.
Right.
So it is definitely enhances that possibility. I'm not sure if I don't know the process by which the mechanism happens that allows them to do it. My God, it's
I don't feel like we have any clue as to what's going to happen in the next 6 months out there.
What a disaster that, they didn't go for Scottish independence and reject Brexit. They really got those 2 extreme referendums backwards.
All right, that's it for calls today. I'm going to take some IMs. Sebi G. Sam, if you clinch the Libertarian nomination, will you promise, if elected, to issue an executive order requiring all audiobooks to be read by Sebastian Gorka? if I have that authority. Mr. Stokes, Casual Friday guest suggestion, get in touch with Trey Crowder, Deep South guy who does liberal-minded comedy.
I feel like Gorka has that authoritarian mind, so that like if we took over, he would have to be like, salutations.
Left is best.
Left is best. How may I help you, Mr. Seder? Can I park your car for you?
Dr. Chaos MD, it's my birthday today, and as a present to myself, I'm buying a copy of Democracy in Chains and Marx's Capital.
Nice.
Mid-30s seems like
Good
a great
books.
time to become Marxist and freak out baby boomers. I think they've earned it. In an effort to fill out my reading list even more, does anyone have an additional suggestion? Doesn't have to be political fair. Also, do you have a list of authors and their books that come on the show, or does one need to comb through the blog to find that? We do. What's the name of that thing? Book Goodreads. Yeah. Majority Report Goodreads. Check it out. Majority Report Goodreads.
We giving a few book recommendations?
Yeah, give one book recommendation.
Read The Corporation. I'm just finishing it right now. It's this. It's basically the untold story of the history of the Cuban numbers racket and gambling in New York and Miami, but how it goes back to the Bay of Pigs and CIA terrorist insurgencies across Latin America. It's very vivid, very well written. The Corporation epic story of the Cuban American underworld. Definitely going to be influencing some future illicit histories on TMBS.
Jamie?
So definitely read Marx. Don't just read Capital. Read all of Marx. Read the Grundrisse. I mean, I'm a hypocrite. I haven't read the Grundrisse yet. But if you want to take the sort of go from the nuts and bolts understanding of capitalism that Marx gives you and look forward to sort of the kind of visionary society that you could use those tools to create. I really, really like leftist sci-fi, especially the Mars trilogy by Kim Stanley Robinson and The Dispossessed by Ursula Le Guin. And after you read the Mars trilogy, you can listen to our interview with Kim Stanley Robinson on the Antifada.
I'll just two books by Ira Katznelson. One is When Affirmative Action Was White, which is very good. Second one being Fear Itself, The New Deal and the Origins of Our Time, which talks about the New Deal as a sort of response, how it was a response and was sort of shaped by a rise in worldwide totalitarianism and authoritarianism.
And I'm sorry, the Quran.
I have not.
I'm just remiss to not recommend the Quran.
I can't even remember the last book that I've read that we have not done on this show. There was honestly, I can't even remember. There was a fiction book I read that I enjoyed that was I feel like.
You said you like Kosher Sex by Shmuley Botayak?
Was it The Prisoner of Azkaban?
That was great, actually.
Yeah, you were just
Shmuley Botayak was great.
Shmuley really taught me.
I think the last. Oh, wait a second. The Family Handyman book is not. That was nonfiction as well.
Y'all just recommended nonfiction books.
I know, but it's not actually a real full-on book. It's you just got
Family The Handyman.
I mean, I have it. I got about 30 pages into that 2041 book, and my whole plan was over vacation that I was going to be able to read because I had this whole plan where I would put the kids into a camp that fell apart. So I didn't have.
Read The Socialist Manifesto. Bhaskar Sankara's new book is awesome.
It's good.
Excellent book.
I finished it over the weekend.
Metaflight. Oh, wait. Are we going to have him on again soon? Bhaskar?
He's going to be on TMBS next Tuesday.
I was not asking that.
He was on, but no, yeah, you should have him.
Metaflight. Hey, Michael, I read up on Olof Palme. He's a fascinating figure. What's your take on the fact that he saved nuclear power in Sweden? Unban me from the chat. I did nothing wrong.
I don't know. That question sounds like you might be bannable from the chat. I don't think much of it, but he is a fascinating figure.
Dater of bad Jews. Is it telling that 10 white guys traveled from all over the eastern seaboard to protest with a bullhorn, a book about white fragility? Prove a point? Much alt-right?
That book, The End of Whiteness, I think it was called, or something like that.
It was called White Fragility.
Oh, yeah.
And they protested it with bullhorn?
Snowflakes.
That's not a good book.
Heretical Christian. Hey, guys, everyone with realizing what a fraud Dave Rubin is and other members of the IDW not coming to his defense, do you think he'll try and play the whole classical liberal idiocy as some sort of Andy Kaufman-esque bit? No, he doesn't have the sophistication for that. Martha Rose. Hey, Sam, I hope by the time you have to vote for the next president, you'll have merch to sell. So I really like to wear an MR t-shirt on the way to the polls. Working on it, believe me. Alex Jones, anyone else care about New York City banning CBD food and drink additives? Any other thoughts on this?
As somebody who
It's annoying.
experienced CBD without the THC in Los Angeles, it's a complete waste of time anyway, so I'm fine with it.
Hot take, Matt. I really I like CBD. It helps me fall asleep at night.
That's Ray. The full Mueller report is available as a free multi-part audiobook podcast read by a guy, Timberlane Media, in a closet in his house. It's very high-quality audio and compelling, no politics or spin. The podcast reader you really need to read or hear yourself. Search Timberlane Mueller. CTMRFN. Sam, Elizabeth Warren just put out a new green manufacturing plan. Looks pretty solid. Large additional funding for project procurement, R&D, and creation of a new federal office. Also started Democracy and Change. It's outstanding.
It's a really good book. I think you got to read that to understand modern American history.
And then read the criticism to understand libertarian whining.
Turn up Bega. Speaking of Colorado, there's a really great progressive here running for Senate. Her name is Lorena Garcia. Everyone, please check her out and support her if you can. Congressional baseball fan, if you'd like to try Dave Rubin's chocolate mint something protein shake for any purpose, drinking or otherwise, you can. It's the Junior Mint Smoothie from the shop next to Starbucks in Santa Monica and Westmount. Make sure to get the whey protein. Oh, yeah, it's $9.99. JF Mikey, the subscription page is down right now. Appears to be so, or error. Oh, interesting. Aliens for Trump. Jesus, if I wanted a number show, I'd watch Sesame Street. Producer Lauren, did you notice that one of the consequences of Disney buying Fox Studios, including FX channel, is FX now running a show called The Weekly, which debuted Sunday night and produced by the failing right-leaning paper, The New York Times? Also, a reminder that BuzzFeed is smartly owned by Comcast, though it's through its NBC division. The final IM of the day. Steel River Savior. I grew up with abuse and have been involved with it for most of my life. Sister-in-law is a mental health professional and social worker. There seems to be a profound lack of empathy in this field with many workers. It leads to many people being ignored by the system or receiving lazy care. People get jaded very quickly, get stuck in jobs for a pension, and tend to push people through the system as quickly and easily as possible. There are a lot of great social work, but a ton of shitty ones. Thoughts, Jamie, Michael, Sam? Love you guys. Scott from VA. Well, that's too big of a topic to address.
They need to get paid more.
Yeah.
It's hard, too. I think there needs to be, we need to have less college debt so more people go in this and so more people can cycle through it, because people get burnt out very, very quickly. I know a lot of people involved in that type of work in one form or another, and the burnout is real and it's understandable. And so we need to figure out a way of getting people to cycle through that.
We need to care for the caretaker.
Maintain their pensions and whatnot. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes you? Yeah, I know the clock is shifted in and